Well, welcome to our first panel this morning. We've got some interesting perspectives on what is happening in and around Washington on the legislative front connected to the issue of digital piracy. And I want to get right into it, suspending any lengthy biographical introductions. I think you've got the bios in front of you, but I'm going to ask, kind of go down the line here and ask each of our panelists to provide some perspective on what's been happening recently in Congress. I think many of you know that right before Memorial Day, the Senate Judiciary Committee marked up the Preventing Real Online Threats to Economic Creativity and Theft of Intellectual Property Act, which we have shortened to the Protect IP Act. This is a version of legislation that kind of modifies and evolves from a piece of legislation considered in the last Congress, which was the Combating Online Infringement and Counterfeit Act, which we conveniently call COICA. So you can already see that there's great intellectual property in the congressional staffers who get to name these pieces of legislation. But that's what I'd like to talk about to begin with, and start, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, with you. You're obviously a Republican representing the 7th District in Tennessee, which I think includes part of Nashville, right?
A little bit of Nashville, a little bit of Memphis. I know my constituent, Rick Carnes, is somewhere down here, other end of the table.
Constituent,
I like
absolutely.
to say I am a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll, and I have more songwriters in my district than anybody else in the country.
That's right.
Well, tell us a little bit, and you're also, more importantly, also on the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Right.
You've really developed some expertise in telecom issues. There is a sort of brewing conversation about the need for legislation and what we could do legislatively to address the problem that we see with rogue websites and digital piracy. What's your take on that? What's the case for legislation? And where's it headed? More importantly, what's the prospect for the legislation both in the Senate and the House?
Right, and I think that the prospects are improving every single day. And as pardon me, as you all know, it takes time for bills to mature and come about. And, of course, the rogue website bill first was introduced last year, and now you have an introduction again this year. Couple of basis points on this. First of all, number one, I am delighted that your conference talks about protecting IP from the ground up. This is so vitally important that we realize you can't wait till you get to the end user, or you can't wait until you get to the finished product. You have to start at the very beginning. And it is an imperative that we do that. And Congress needs to realize that you've got to move away from legislating to technology and realize that you need to focus on the creator and the end use. And that is an appropriate framework to build as we address these issues. Secondly, in a period of time in our nation's history when we are talking about jobs, look at what theft of intellectual property cost us. The estimates for the G20 nations are that you're losing over $600 billion a year and 2.5 million jobs because of theft of IP. Then next, look at how this penetrates so many different economic sectors of our country and of our economy, because not only is it the entertainment product that Susanna spoke so beautifully to, and I know you're going to hear from others on that, but look at what is happening as you look at the theft of ideas in the manufacturing sector, in the green technology sector, in the healthcare informatics sector, and then the rogue websites issue gets into that finished product issue and putting sometimes a very dangerous product into the mainstream, into the consumer mainstream. So because of all of this, the prospects for dealing with the online piracy And the theft issue improves every single day because it touches more Americans every single day. And certainly for those of us in the Nashville area, we have seen the impact of this on the entertainment industry for many years. Now, one of the components that we have to realize is that the rogue websites open consumers, and more of our consumers, our constituents, realize this on a daily basis. It exposes them to viruses. It exposes them to data theft. And as we address this issue, it is going to take all of us working together. It's going to take the Chamber of Commerce. It is going to take different professional organizations, different associations working with us to make certain that these sites are singled out, that they are not able to conduct financial transactions, processing with credit cards and PayPal, that the ISPs are going to block them or eliminate them and not carry them, so that we are able to single these out. I know the Better Business Bureau and online advertisers are working together to come up with a good housekeeping seal, if you will, and a way to make people aware of who the good actors are so that it helps us to isolate the bad actors. And as all of this consumer awareness takes place, then for those of us on Capitol Hill, it helps us to fit in the proper manner. Of course, the best option is for the industry to take the lead in addressing this, and then for us to be able to focus on where government should properly come in and be the least intrusive in this issue as the framework is built out for handling it. You're also going to see the piracy and the privacy issues begin to be combined. The discussion over in the coming months about who owns the virtual you and your data that is held by companies. This is another reason that dealing with the rogue websites issue is vitally important. What happens with that data? And of course now you're seeing an increase in data breaches. So all of these issues will move to the forefront over the next 18 months. We hope to be able to keep a good ongoing dialogue with you. As I've spoken at tech conferences this year, I'm beginning to see some repeat attendees and some familiar faces, and we appreciate that. I hope that you will stay in touch with us. My website is blackburn.house.gov, and of course you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, and stay in touch with us. Let us hear from you and continue the conversation with you on this issue.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We're also joined today by another member of Congress, Representative Jared Polis, a Democrat representing the 2nd Congressional District in Colorado, but more importantly brings a perspective as someone who's been a successful entrepreneur and working in the technology area. Jared, I renewed my Blue Mountain account this morning in your honor, so thank you. Thank you for being with us today. There, as much as I'd say everybody understands that there is a real problem here with rogue websites, the loss of economic activity, as Congresswoman Blackburn said, there's still some skepticism that we have found the right tool with Protect IP. Is that correct? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I wish it was the right tool. My sympathies are with rights owners. My own business background has generally been on the content side. You mentioned BlueMountain.com. My parents are an artist and a poet. They had their intellectual property stolen and had to go to court to protect it. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill for songwriters being reimbursed by radio companies, and made all the radio stations in my district mad. And I'm happy to do that because it's the right thing to do to protect the rights of the rights owners. Now, unfortunately, looking at DNS as a mechanism for enforcing intellectual property is so highly flawed to be simply impossible and counterproductive. Yes, it's true you can eliminate online piracy by eliminating the Internet on one end, and yes, you can reduce it by weakening and reducing what the Internet can and is and do. This is an issue that a number of founders of the Internet wrote a great letter to Senate Judiciary on, saying that using DNS to disable sites, rogue sites, would fragment the Internet's global domain system. It would ruin our government's credibility in supporting a free and open Internet, paving the way for less enlightened regimes to use DNS disablement for even worse ends. The domain system registry is something that is above the laws of any particular country. It's not the right mechanism. We have a mechanism, and I'm happy to work on improving it with the Digital Millennium Copyrights Act. As we look at the growth of online advertisers and search and payment systems, there might be some appropriate modifications to the Digital Millennium Copyrights Act. But this bill, this Protect IP Act, doesn't even make a clear safe harbor for the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And just as piracy has a cost, a weakening and destruction of the Internet due to overarching government regulation also has a cost. So this is a very clear one. It's one where, one of my companies I started was an Internet access provider, so I've been involved with this on all sides: content, Internet access, and content, both as a creator and a licensor of content. This is analogous to, we always try to create analogies with the Internet, but this is a very apt one. It's really exactly what we're doing here. Let's say you live in a neighborhood and there's a drug house, there's a crack house, a couple doors down. The right answer, would be police raiding it, arresting people. There might be a process for condemnation. That might take too long. You might say, let's come up with an idea to make it easier to condemn a crack house and take it over and demolish it sooner. That would be a good idea. But what we're doing with this bill is you're saying, let's get rid of all the street signs in the neighborhood. Let's no longer call this Main Street USA. We're going to literally take down all the streets. The crack house is still there. You take down DNS, you're not doing anything about the offending website. Let me be clear. The offending website is still there. You just have to type in a number to get there instead of a name. You're taking away the street address. And, of course, you have a number of websites that have both infringing and non-infringing uses, user-generated content. And those have generally been the nexus of innovation. I think the Digital Millennium Copyright Act works pretty well with regard to making sure that when given notice, they act immediately to take down infringing content. Do we need better international enforcement of copyright? Absolutely, absolutely. You want to talk about the cost of piracy? Look at China. Look at companies that might widely use unlicensed versions of software, and their American and European competitors have to pay for those same licenses, and then they're competing against us, having stolen our intellectual property and not passing along the cost of that intellectual property into their product. It's one of the reasons that their products can beat us on price. But again, the answer is not to look at our domain name system. The answer is not to have a system that would encourage sites that have both infringing and non-infringing content to be taken down. When you look at also some of the provisions around the enablers, if you will, let's call it, online payment systems, advertisers, etc., they're basically given immunity if they take down something that may or may not be offending. So all it takes is anybody, rights owner, legitimate or not, just having a lawyer to send a letter, and any general counsel for any of those guys will say, yes, if there's any doubt, we're going to take it down, because you're basically saying they get immunity there, without regards to the merits, without regards to who actually owns intellectual property. The corporate executives of the company may make a different decision, but every general counsel will advise that they take down any content that they get a warning letter, a properly worded warning letter from a lawyer about. And only the big guys will be able to fight that. And of course, we know that most of the innovation on the internet comes from the little guys and the guys and gals that we don't know about yet. Before Facebook was a multi-billion-dollar company, it was in Mark Zuckerberg's dorm room. Before Yahoo was a multi-million-dollar company, and some of you might remember when it was actually hosted on the Stanford site. I certainly do. We don't know what the great company of tomorrow will be, but I can assure you that they don't have an army of lawyers today, nor should they have to. And the internet has been such a value center, both on the cultural level and economic level. any bill that destroys the internet, as this bill does, is not something that is in the best interest of rights owners either. So, I mean, let's begin a real discussion about protecting rights owners, looking at Digital Millennium Copyright Act, looking at multilateral enforcement. Again, I'm philosophically entirely with you. There are people that try to profit from stolen intellectual property out there. There are rogue websites that give, throw caution to the wind about their tactics. But again, just as if there was a crack house in your neighborhood, the answer is to condemn that crack house, to arrest the people involved. It's not to take down the street signs in the neighborhood so your friends and neighbors trying to visit you, an honest or social business, can't even find your home.
I want to bring in some other perspectives on the panelists, but I know, Congresswoman Blackman, you've got to leave pretty soon. I'd like to maybe each of you take a second on this, because that's an interesting, different perspectives here. Do we actually need legislation? Or, Congressman Polis, you're sort of suggesting maybe we do, but this is not it. Or is this an approach, is the Protect IP Act something that could be worked with, modified, some of the concerns that you've just expressed addressed in the course of the legislative process? Or should we go back and start over? And I'd like each of you, where do you think we are, where are we going, and then what do you think would be the right response?
We do need legislation. I don't know if this can be fixed per se. Insofar as at its heart it has the domain registries as a key enforcement mechanism, which I just don't see as a viable enforcement mechanism that is in the interests of rights owners in the medium and long run, is in the interests of the internet, or is in the interests of our country. There was a very good piece on how to fix the bill, which I'll find here in a minute and tell you who it's by. But I think that the key lies to enforcement of the DMCA, both domestically in terms of expediting processes for enforcement, as well as, this is the key part, international enforcement. Now, we only have so many levers for international enforcement. Trade policy is one, the World Trade Organization. I think that this should be a major diplomatic initiative of this country, particularly because so much of our prosperity is tied into our intellectual property. One of the most important things that we can do on the trade, the foreign policy front, even working through the United Nations, is to elevate the enforcement of these issues to ensure that American rights owners and, of course, foreign rights owners receive their due compensation. So, yes, I think a bill that expedites and improves on DMCA would be relevant. And even more importantly, and a lot of this would come from the administration, but I think Congress can also help, elevating the importance of these issues on the international front.
I think that what we have to realize, as I said earlier, ideas take time to evolve and mature in D.C. And you, as Congress is looking at the issue, bear in mind that the House version of this bill has not even been filed yet. And Bob Goodlatte out of Virginia will bring that forward soon. It is something that is being worked on. Should the industry take the lead in addressing this through the free market? Sure. And there are things that should be done by the industry. Is there broad support for moving forward on legislation? Yes, there is, on a bipartisan basis, for addressing this issue, because it is an area where we are losing money, we are losing jobs, and rights holders and creators continue to tell us we need the ability to protect what we have created, and being able to have more opportunities to bring those causes of actions and protect their work is important. And I think that as we look at protecting intellectual property in a global economy in the 21st century, that it is important for the United States to say, indeed, we realize that the ideas that our innovators come forward with, what our creative community brings forward, deserves to be protected. And many of the protections that have been there in the physical world need to apply in the online world. So that's why I say follow us, work with us, let us hear from you. we want to make certain that we do this right, and we do it in a timely manner. The creative community, and I know so many of my constituents, whether they are songwriters, whether they are creating content that is going to be delivered over the internet, whether they're in healthcare or healthcare informatics, or whether they're one of the green technology patent holders that are in our state, whether they are in logistics innovation and programming, they are telling us, they bring to our attention those that are in those websites that are infringing on their product and on their ideas and need to be held accountable.
And real quickly, just a citation. Ryan Radia from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a center-right think tank, a conservative think tank, has some suggestions, 5 ways Congress can fix the copyright bill, and RADIA, you can Google that, and it would provide a workable framework. And just to be clear, the political problems would certainly not stem more from the left than from the right. If anything, they'd be more from the right, but they are non-ideological. They're certainly across the ideological spectrum.
All right, let's, Steve Tepp, I want to bring you into the conversation. You're the Senior Director for Internet Piracy and Counterfeiting at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The interest of the business community in this whole subject goes because it goes beyond just the entertainment world or some of the creative artists that we've been talking about so far this morning. Tell us a little bit about, the Congresswoman mentioned some of the economic costs of piracy and counterfeiting. What motivated the Chamber to become seized of this issue?
Well, the Chamber has created a global intellectual property center because it recognizes that the value of American intellectual property is critical to business in the United States and around the world. 19 million Americans are employed by IP-intensive industries, and those same industries account for 60% of U.S. exports. It's a fundamental aspect of our economy, and if we're going to truly get out of the economic funk that we're in, if we're going to truly double exports, as the President said is his goal, we need to be protecting intellectual property better than we're doing now. Reasonable minds can differ about some of the nuanced questions of copyright that Congressman Polis has referenced. That's not the subject of the legislation known as the Protect IP Act. The Protect IP Act is about theft, out-and-out theft. By definition, the websites at issue are dedicated to infringing activities, that is, copyright piracy and trademark counterfeiting. And the value of American intellectual property is not lost on foreign pirates and counterfeiters. They have created rogue site after rogue site and have attracted over 53 billion visits to their rogue sites every year. There's only one website anywhere in the world that gets more visits, and that's Facebook. Any other website you can mention is third place after Facebook and rogue sites. It's a huge problem, and we need to do something about it. To the extent that rogue sites are based in the U.S. and operated in the U.S., existing law can apply, and that's great. The DMCA is a great law. It's worked very well. But the reality is, many rogue sites are operated outside the United States, beyond the jurisdiction of U.S. law enforcement. And so we need a practical tool to deal with that. Congressman Polis said we need to do a better job in terms of international efforts to improve intellectual property protection and enforcement. On that, we agree 1,000%. Unfortunately, the reality is that there are many places in the world that don't have adequate and effective intellectual property systems and that don't give any appearance of an intention to do so. And in fact, unfortunately, some of the same groups that have expressed opposition to the Protect IP Act also go around the world telling other countries, don't listen to the U.S. You shouldn't be protecting intellectual property. You should do less, in fact. There's no reason why the United States should have to be continued to suffer for being ripped off by foreign thieves while we wait for other countries to get their act together. And so the Protect IP Act proposes to cut off rogue sites from the U.S. market, an eminently reasonable proposition. this conference is primarily focused on copyright issues, but as Mike just alluded, the legislation goes much further. It goes to counterfeiting as well, which is also a huge problem. And let's not forget that many of these sites are designed in a way to deceive consumers. It's not people looking to get counterfeits, looking to get illegal downloads. There are those, of course, and those are the hardest to stop. What we can certainly do something about are the folks who are being deceived into thinking they're getting legitimate products when in fact what they're buying are counterfeits that may be substandard, that may be dangerous. Point blank, rogue sites have killed. We can do something about that. The crack house analogy is a good one. But the difference is the crack house that we see in the context of a rogue online site doesn't say it's a crack house. It says it's a kid's toy store. And people go onto this website thinking what they're getting is safe because they think it's a legitimate site, but it's not. It's not legitimate and it's not safe. We need to do something about it. If we had a place like that, the answer is to raid it and shut it down and arrest the people behind it and put them in jail. And if we can, get them to compensate the people they've harmed. But the reality is we can't do that because these people are often operating outside the U.S. They're not going to respond to a U.S. court order. They're not going to respond to a summons. I don't think that a computer full of infringing material, that everyone would agree the police have a right to seize if it's in somebody's house and they've got 10,000 copies of books and software and music and movies, video games, all illegal. I don't think that becomes sacrosanct just because somebody plugs it into the internet and makes it the server for a website. What we need to do is take whatever reasonable steps we can to address it. Now, we've heard a lot about this, the DNS issue. The reality is there's already DNS blocking going on. And nothing in the legislation specifically says how the DNS solution will be achieved. The complaints about the DNS system are that it will create a weakness in the internet. Well, the internet already has a weakness. They're rogue sites. They're sites that, as Congressman Blackburn said, are exposing consumers to malicious viruses, to identity theft. I think a safe internet is better than a lawless one. And I don't think we have to sacrifice our consumer safety in the name of a theoretical internet security. No marketplace can function either under burdensome, overbearing rules or in the absence of any rules. And the internet is no different in that respect. We need some common sense rules to protect the businesses that are selling these products, the people who innovate, who invest their time, effort, creativity, and genius in creating our best products, and the consumers who want to be able to go online and have a safe online experience. That's what this legislation is about. That's why it has bipartisan support. That's why it was unanimously approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's why it has overwhelming support from small businesses, large businesses, organized labor. And that's why I think this bill is going to be law, and I hope it is soon. Thanks.
Larry Downs, author, academic, and expert on disruptive technologies. You've talked a lot to companies in Silicon Valley. What do you feel like, and picking up maybe on the point that Steve is making, do you feel like we're doing enough or they are doing enough to help consumers understand what they're getting into? What are some of the perspectives that you've heard in some of your research?
Well, I think start with the good news is that there's a general belief that the draft of Protect IP is a considerable improvement over last year's version, over COICA, which struck many of us as really demonstrating a kind of scary naivete about just how just the engineering mechanics of how the internet worked. There were just provisions in COICA that suggested that Congress didn't really understand what the internet was and how it operated. And many of those have been either corrected or tempered in the draft of Protect IP. So that's, I think, a piece of good news. And as Steve says, it's important to make clear, almost all of Protect IP is directed towards dealing with non-domestic websites. There is considerable law, both civil and criminal, dealing with domestic problems having to do with intellectual property, including the Pro-IP Act, which is what the Department of Homeland Security has been using for operation in our sites, as well as the DMCA, which private parties can use to take down content that's illegally posted. The problem, of course, with as Steve says, with non-domestic sites is it's very difficult to get jurisdiction over the people who are operating them because they're outside of the U.S., sometimes operating in places where our treaty relationships or the Berne Convention may operate, but it's very difficult to actually get the level of enforcement we would like to see. And there's some provisions of Protect IP that are not particularly worrisome, I think, to Silicon Valley, in particular the financial transaction processors provision, as well as the advertising network provision, that are two ways of trying to get at these people without actually getting jurisdiction over it, and essentially cut off the money supply from either from advertising or directly through payment processing. Those seem to be reasonable efforts and hopefully would go a long way to solving the problem. There are a couple of provisions, though, that are quite worrisome to internet companies, particularly in terms of how the infrastructure would be organized. And one of them is indeed the provision for DNS blocking. There's some drafting concerns, I think, in the current version of it. There's only one reference to DNS. It's very vague, and it refers to non-authoritative domain name resolution. Non-authoritative is not actually defined in the draft, and so it's not entirely clear who is being targeted in that particular provision. But it's simply, I wouldn't say unrealistic, it's just impossible to implement that provision in any kind of engineering sense in a way that wouldn't, I wouldn't go as far as saying break the internet, but would certainly greatly undermine the integrity of the domain name system and make it much less useful for everybody as a general rule. That provision has probably the most significant unintended side effects and quite a bit of potential harm. The new draft also introduced what was not in COICA was a provision having to deal with search engines and hyperlinks, although it doesn't call them that directly. But essentially, one of the things that can happen under Protect IP is that a court order can be issued to search engines as well as, at least the way the current draft reads, to anybody who hyperlinks to any website can be ordered to essentially remove search results or remove hyperlinks that may point to a website that has met the definition of, dedicated to infringing activities. Again, this is completely impractical from an operational standpoint, and from an enforcement standpoint, what would likely happen is the Department of Justice would get court orders and go to the largest search engines, Google and Yahoo and so on, and have them implement this. And the same thing I think would happen here as with the DNS servers is what's likely to happen is essentially you get two internets. You have the sort of big internet where these orders are enforced and where essentially you do take down the street signs. The place is still there. You can still get to it. And anyone who really wants to get there knows how to get there anyway, so it's not really having much effect directly. But indirectly, consumers now will find that sometimes they search, they get to one place, sometimes they search, they get to another place, or sometimes they type a domain name, they get to a place they expect, and sometimes they get to a place they don't expect. And that, I think, is the principal concern in Silicon Valley, is that the way that search results work, the way that hyperlinks work, and the way that the domain system works is very decentralized for a good reason, and tinkering with the mechanics of it here, very unlikely to have much positive impact and lots of potential unintended consequences that would be quite negative.
Chris Castle, let me get you to jump in here. Okay. You're obviously, as a copyright attorney, representing a lot of people with a very strong interest in this. Do you think the legislation, as it's evolving, is fixable? How would you address some of the concerns that have been raised, both by Larry and by the congressman?
Well, the first thing I would say about the search engine blocking is that it's important to sort of understand how the process works here for these rogue sites. If you go to a search engine and you put in, let's say, Paramore, you're going to get a bunch of results about the band Paramore. If you put in Paramore torrents, what you're going to get is probably in roughly this order: the Pirate Bay, LimeWire, IsoHunt, and then some assorted other torrent sites. Well, the Pirate Bay had been convicted of crimes. IsoHunt has been found criminally or civilly liable. LimeWire has been found civilly liable, and some of these others have at least pending action, and sometimes they've been found liable. Now, so the question is, why is it so important to have those results for people where we know that there has been successful litigation or criminal prosecution brought against these people, and why is it important to have those results there? I also know that there was a story in CNET about a year and a half ago that one of the big search engines blocked the Pirate Bay, and then issued an announcement that they were very sorry, that to their users that they had blocked the Pirate Bay, and they were doing everything they could to make sure that was restored immediately. Now, why in the world would they do that? So, search results deliver links to rogue sites. Advertising is sold either on the search results, on pop-ups on the way to the search target, to the rogue site that's being linked to, and then on the rogue site itself. And Ellen Seidler, who's going to be coming on later, and I think Kathy Wolf is also going to talk about their experiences in terms of this kind of cycle. This is a lot of money. I mean, I don't know exactly how much money it is that people are making in advertising from this little process, but I have a sense that it's quite a bit. I know that one company who got caught doing essentially the same thing with advertising for illegal drugs has announced that it has to reserve pending a Justice Department ruling or probably plea bargain $500 million in anticipation of paying a fine. That's not a small fine. That's just one area of bad advertising. So my sense is that this is a lot of money, and in my experience, having been in the music business for a long time, I will tell you, people will do a lot of things for $500 million, So, that's one thing that I think has to get solved. I don't think it's very much a sort of programmer's mentality to say, well, I found one mistake in your argument, therefore all of your argument fails, and we have to throw all of it out. That just doesn't work in reality. That may work in programming, but that doesn't work in reality. There's bad things happening as a result of these processes, and if this doesn't, if the DNS blocking is not necessarily the result that people want, or search engine blocking is not the result that people want, then what they need to do is they need to figure out how to get past the problem that is being created for American workers. In addition to representing some of these people, I, for a long time, was a member of Local 47 of the American Federation of Musicians, and I will tell you that one of the things that I think has really changed in the last 2 years or so is that organized labor has really come forward and turned, joined together and brought focus to the fact that this is ultimately a jobs issue in this country. I mean, we have a horrible economic situation right now, and we have these jobs in not just the entertainment business, but in pharmaceuticals, businesses around coffee, businesses that operate around brands. These jobs could be saved by simply enforcing the law. And the law is not being enforced. So I think ultimately we have to ask ourselves, what's the government for? Why do we have the sovereign? In the absence of whom life is nasty, cold, brutish, and short. right? So it's very nasty, cold, brutish, and short for members of Local 47 and the American Federation of Musicians. I can tell you that. And they're looking to their sovereign and saying, what about me? You know? So I think that as we go through this process, the first thing that I try to keep in mind is that ultimately this is about protecting people who are really not able to protect themselves. And this gets to the DMCA. You hear a lot of people say, "Oh, the DMCA is working great." Well, the DMCA is not working great. For independent artists, it may as well not be there, because you can't afford to monitor the internet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, there's a cost to sending out DMCA notices. Even if, I mean, I will almost guarantee you that if you go to the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Judiciary Committee as it was constituted when the DMCA passed the Congress, which, by the way, passed unanimously, and you said to any of these members, such as Vice President Biden or Senator Leahy, was it your intention, Senator, that one company receive 1 million takedown notices in 1 year? Was that what you had in mind when you passed the DMCA? Was it what you had in mind was that artists should monitor the internet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and send these notices out to people who probably don't care about them? Was it your intention that a response to a DMCA notice, what's called the counter notification in the statute, it could be interpreted as an autoresponder? I'm on vacation, and the site that's receiving the autoresponder says, "Oh, we got a notice back from the offending person, and so now you have to go to federal court." Is that sort of what you had in mind, Senator? You know, what do you think they're going to say? You think they're going to say, "Yeah, no, actually, I had 5 million in mind," or do you think they're going to say that needs to get fixed? But because this is the reason we have this bill. One of the reasons we have this bill, I think, is because the DMCA is not working, and because these people have basically built a business. The rogue sites have built a business in the cracks that steal American jobs, and no one is really doing anything about it until this bill was introduced as COICA.
Yeah, Congressman, I know you've got to go, but you made the case that DMCA was sufficient, or you could actually use that as a tool. What's the response to that?
The framework works. So, real briefly on DMCA, if there's obviously if you're a small artist and there's nominal infringements and you're not monitoring it, if there's anything that reaches any economic critical mass where you actually care about it or could profit from it, then you notice it and you do something about it. If someone's doing something that starts generating millions of dollars with your work or hundreds of thousands of dollars with your work, many artists appreciate brand building and have some tolerance for non-commercial infringement. That's up to them if they want to, but it can be helpful. This Protect IP Act is simply not in the interest of rights owners for three main reasons. One, it significantly hurts American credibility for international enforcement mechanisms, which are absolutely critical in this effort, and this undermines our credibility. Two, it pushes illicit activity further underground. I mean, no, we're not fooling anybody if you think you're eliminating illicit activity. You're creating alternative name registries. You're driving things further offshore. You might be driving traffic from legitimate search vehicles like Google to less legitimate competitors that will inevitably arise if there's some form of government censorship imposed on Google. And finally, by not ending the Internet, but by damaging and bifurcating the Internet, which is truly what this is doing, you are inhibiting future innovations that rights owners will benefit from, and we can't even foresee what those will be today. New distribution mediums, new ways that rights owners can benefit from their works will absolutely be inhibited by this weakening and bifurcation of the Internet. And for those reasons, as somebody who is firmly in the rights owners and creative camp, this bill is counterproductive on capitalizing on American intellectual property, which is more and more the mainstay of our economy. I mean, there's no doubt that this bill will destroy American jobs if it becomes law, not only in the Internet industry, but also on the content side.
Rick Carnes, you're president of the Songwriters Guild and been traveling to try to raise awareness on this issue. Are you listening to this conversation? Are you encouraged or discouraged that we are going to do something to protect the countless thousands of songwriters who've seen their jobs lost?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Arts+Labs for having a conference that talks about creativity from the ground up, because I am the ground. I mean, you don't get any lower in the music business than being a songwriter. I mean, we're like the first to work and the last to get paid in the value chain. And what we have seen is basically 13 years of our jobs being destroyed. I really enjoyed hearing Suzanne talk, because she's telling the truth from a artist perspective, where they may lose revenue on one side and they try to make it up on another side because they're creative people. That's what creative people have always done. They've learned to go into the marketplace, be innovative, create a way to make a buck off of giving people value in their lives with art. Songwriters, however, make their living from copyright. Our one right, the one thing we create, is the property that is strictly the right to copy. That's what copyright is, just the right to copy. We all forget that, okay? And as a songwriter, if I don't have the right to control copies, I actually don't have any property whatsoever. My rights are gone. Now, my rights went away in probably 1998, okay, when Napster basically took over my rights and just started distributing unlimited copies of my work. Now it's 13 years later, right? And nothing has changed. Now, I understand all the arguments, and these are, by the way, the same arguments that I've heard for 13 years. You know, it's freedom of speech, we're going to break the internet, et cetera, et cetera. But what I don't hear is that they're going to balance my rights with somebody else's rights in a fair way. You know, I never hear somebody say, well, okay, you have a right and this is how it's going to be enforced. Because this is one of a number of bills that have come up. And every time the bill comes up, it's always the same, well, it's not exactly perfect. It has to be perfect. Like Chris was saying, as a programmer, you know, you see one line of code that doesn't reference the right place. You go, okay, well, the whole code is broken. That's not the way copyright has ever worked. Copyright is always the balance between the rights of the creator and the rights of the users, okay? And frankly, we have completely flipped the value chain. Everybody out there makes money off of my work except me. You have websites selling searches on illegal files, like Chris was saying, the torrent files. They sell advertising, okay? They make money on it. The sites themselves sell advertising. Sometimes they sell products like the counterfeit products. They make money on it. Everybody in the equipment manufacturers, they actually create the boxes. They make money off of boxes. Everybody makes the value that I create with my work, except me. I don't make any. And just like Suzanne was saying, she has a daughter who's a 16-year-old who said, hey, I'm not going in the music business. I'm not crazy. I'm not going to create value for everybody else in the chain except me. From the ground level, my daughter was a great songwriter, would not go into songwriting because she realized, hey, I'm not going to create a product from the ground level and have everybody above me make the money except me. I'm not going to do it. And I had to respect that. I mean, I couldn't tell her, well, it's not true, and it's going to change because, frankly, this is 13 years later, has not changed. So quite apart from saying this bill isn't exactly perfect and we should can it, my attitude is, okay, if it's not exactly perfect, then let's figure out a way to make it good enough to protect my rights to continue to be able to be paid for the use of my work. So
I want to ask all the panelists to jump in on this. That strikes me as part of the problem. We've talked about this in other settings, that we allowed a culture to develop in which content was free and freely available. And obviously, a lot of people could, with hindsight, and I could look back and say that's the mistake. But I want to ask, I think we've heard a lot of discussions about our 16-year-old kids this morning. Is there any way we can change that culture? Is there any way that the combination of different interests around this issue could work together on that problem as we address, however we address with legislation, the enforcement tools that we need.
Yeah, from the Songwriters Guild perspective, it's been fascinating to go into colleges and talk to kids about what they're doing to creativity in the country and their future jobs in those markets. And they immediately start in on attacking. They have the same talking points about the big corporations and everything. Exactly like Suzanne was saying, there's an idea that it was a big bloated industry, and we're getting what we deserved. And maybe to some degree that was right. Not from the songwriter's perspective, because obviously we were never making the money to begin with. But I do understand that attitude. But we have not done a sufficient job of educating people where songs come from the ground up. Because the songwriters are like the plankton in the ocean of the creative industry. But we no one sees us. Okay, you have no idea when you see the Grammys and somebody singing one of these songs that actually somebody else wrote the song. Because you're never going to see that person. So it's really easy to steal from someone that you don't even know exists. And so it would help a lot if people actually knew who songwriters were, if they knew from the ground up that there's somebody creating a film somewhere or a cartoon somewhere. They don't see that. And it would help if we could actually make the invisible visible. But, once again, it's hard to do that in an educational process.
Can I just add one thing to that? There's a process out there which we call getting metallicized. Which is when an artist stands up and says, I don't want to be ripped off, like Metallica did. Metallica, I think you could question the strategy of also filing a lawsuit at the same time, but be that as it may, Metallica was absolutely vilified by everybody. And every single time, although I'm happy to say at a decreasing rate, an artist stands up and says, I don't want to be ripped off, the same reaction comes down. Like Lily Allen, of all people, Lily Allen, who's, for those of you who don't know, is a 20-something British pop star, a very pretty girl, much in the Lady Gaga kind of marketing tradition, at least. And she stood up and said, this file sharing is wrong, but not because it's wrong for her, because she's making money, right? But because it was wrong for people who she didn't even know, who were the new artists coming along. That was her point, right? Which I think was sort of heroic, because she knew what was coming her way, right? And she was absolutely vilified. And virtually no one in the press stood up and defended her. Elton John finally defended her. And then we can get into more detail on it if anyone's interested in the whole sordid story. But basically what ended up happening was this person was savage, and that's what happens every single time an artist stands up and objects to this, is they're savaged as being greedy, lazy. Like union workers who are entitled to residuals are told that they're lazy because they're not doing any work for the money that they get. People who get a royalty on a song or a movie or a sound recording are told that they're lazy because they shouldn't get royalties because they only did the work when they created the work. All these kinds of things, which when you listen to them, are just absolutely patently absurd. But you hear it from the mouths of educated people and sometimes professors. So I think that there's a real fear on the part of some people to come out and say anything negative about file sharing, and it's even gotten into the places like the academy and also, frankly, in churches. I mean, I've talked to guys in interfaith groups, about, how do you deal with this issue, pastor, as part of your church group, and they'll say, well, there's a lot of other things that we need to be worried about, and world hunger, this kind of, and I'm like, really? Does it have anything to do with the potential negative reaction you feel you might get from your parishioners, And so, the places where you would go, where you would expect to see the sort of moral structure that would, which it really is what keeps people from beating each other over the head anyway, it's not the police, places where you would see this kind of moral structure come from are really not necessarily stepping up in the way they would if it was stealing cars or crack houses or other more common crimes.
Listen, before we dismiss this panel, I want to give the audience, anyone in the audience who's got a burning question, a chance to ask. If you've heard something yes. We can hold on just a second. We'll throw the microphone your way. If you could pass that forward. Thank you.
Well, I am a musician, songwriter, and my objective is to write music and eat and be paid for the things that I do. And as somebody who's paid $20 for CDs, I find that piracy existed way before MP3s. I wonder if the industry, it just doesn't seem that the industry takes any responsibility for what they did that created this mindset. We talk about 16-year-olds, but there's no 16-year-olds here. We don't include them in the conversation. We don't know what's happening. I find it difficult to justify telling somebody you've got to pay for my music because I feel like, no, I don't have to pay for it. And I didn't hear anything up here. Heard a lot of words. I didn't hear any lyrics. Didn't hear anything sounded like music. I can't really address what Honorable Marshall Blackburn had to say, but the musicians told me that we need more legislation. I don't believe it.
What about that?
Well, okay. I don't know exactly what the question was.
My question really is, this sounds like it's representing industry. It doesn't sound like it's representing artists.
You're a musician, so what's your question?
It doesn't sound like, my needs are being addressed or represented here. I don't feel like musicians are really included in the conversation. I know Metallica. I've worked in the industry for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm
a musician, former recording artist and a songwriter. And from my perspective, when people say, well, I should give my music away for exposure, for instance, and we both have heard that a lot, right? Well, I'm a songwriter. I die of exposure. You know what I mean?
Right.
Exposing my songs without them getting paid for makes me nothing. So when somebody wants to protect my property from illegal exposure, then that does matter to me. And I don't make money off of concert sales, T-shirts, those sort of things. So that directly affects me as an artist. Now, I do understand some of what they're talking about. So I think you kind of have to parse through the issues, and not everything that we say relates directly to you as an artist, but some of it might directly relate to you as a songwriter, for instance.
But, I've watched the industry collapse. I've worked in big studios. Right now I write for a blog for a guy who was formerly the president of Warner Reprise Music.
I want to get one last question back here if we get that in, and I think then we're going to have to move on to the next panel.
I wrote original music for about 25 years, had to get out of the business because I couldn't control, the use. It's very much this problem. Now I do issue advocacy work, and in this town, that's a big deal. A lot of people in this room have done that kind of work. What I want to ask about in terms of this law is that there's a very bright red line between infringement and fair use. And I think that part of the problem with the younger generation and people that are not listening to this conversation, they don't understand what fair use is. They think that they're sort of like exercising their fair use when they rip stuff off. But for people like me that have to deal with issues that we are trying to, that we have to use a clip from here and we have to have a picture from there, there's a real fuzzy line that seems to not be getting any clearer. And what I worry about in any kind of legislation is that somebody kind of uses that to shut down free speech from somebody who's trying to do it the way I do it in terms of following the letter of the law. But I could see microsites that are targeting a particular issue or candidate. Somebody says, well, that's kind of that's a rogue site. That's not really me. That's somebody else. In shutting down that conversation, manipulating this law. So are you trying to inject that clarity in this kind of legislation? Because I think that's a big point. And I think that clearing up fair use issues start to address what I think is this whole thing about music and you getting your rights ripped off and everything else. People don't understand what fair use is. They hear that term and they use it as a license to steal.
Yep. Well, Steve and then Chris, you'd be good on that subject too. Go ahead, Steve.
Great, thanks. Look, fair use means a lot of things to a lot of people. What I can tell you for certain is it's not what this bill's about. This bill's about the out-and-out theft that goes on these sites that are dedicated to infringement. We're not talking about 16-year-olds. We're not talking about mashups. We're talking about websites full of fake sneakers or television programs or live sporting events that there's no credible argument of legitimacy about. And how do we do something about it? Nothing in this bill changes the scope of copyright law, changes the scope of trademark law. It's simply, how do we have an enforcement mechanism against the worst of the worst online IP thieves? There's got to be a way to do something about it. It's not going to solve every problem. We're not going to change all consumer expectations by passing a piece of legislation. It's going to require education, a demonstration of the innovation life cycle, as Rick was talking about, but it also requires adequate enforcement. I've had people say to me when I challenge them for downloading illegally, well, if it's illegal, why is it there? And of course, the answer is it shouldn't be there. It isn't legal, but we don't have an effective tool to get rid of it. And this won't even get rid of it. Congressman Polis was right. The Protect IP Act is not going to take down foreign rogue sites. They'll still exist. We can at least cut them off from the U.S. market, protect U.S. consumers from the dangerous products that are being sold, from the malware, from the identity theft, protect our creators, protect our innovators, protect our jobs. That's what this bill's about. It's a step in the right direction against truly what everyone should agree are websites that have no place in a legitimate online market. Surely we can do at least that.
That's going to have to be the last word, but this is a conversation, obviously, that's only beginning because the other panels that we have today are probably going to be touching on many of these same subjects. But I'd like to invite Andrew and the next panel to come on up, and we'll just go straight into that. Thank you. Let's give the panel a round of applause. Thank you.